Hello! Today we're going to be talking about Contempt all Ryōshū, the identity, not the ego. And we're just going to be talking about just some basic information about it. Now, before we start, just some basic information. This ID is a tremor and bleed unit that also has really major synergy with the E.G.O Fell Bullet Yi-Song identity, which I will explain when the time comes. So let's get into this. So, for Ryōshū skill 1, it inflicts tremor count and bleed count and also gaze. And if the target has gaze or contempt, she will gain 1 extra clash power. Essentially, this attack will usually always have clash power because the target you may attack will usually always have gaze or contempt. And gains extra coin power for every 6 bleed plus tremor on said target with a max of 2 extra coin power. So it really is just a basic skill 1. So this Ryōshū skill 2 inflicts tremor, bleed, tremor count, and bleed count, and also gaze. It can also trigger tremor burst if the target has 3 plus tremor count. It will have increased clash power if the target has gaze or contempt, and has increased coin power for every 6 bleed plus tremor on a target. So essentially, they should usually always have the extra clash power, but maybe not always the coin power. So she, like a lot of other identities, has 2 skill 3s. Her first one, if the target has gaze, the skill will inflict more bleed and tremor potency. And it has increased coin power for every 8 bleed plus tremor on the target with a max of 2. It inflicts more damage for every bleed and tremor on the target. It also inflicts tremor, bleed, tremor count, and bleed count. It also will inflict 3 gaze. And it'll also trigger amplitude conversion into tremor hemorrhage, and will also inflict tremor burst as well. And then when she goes to use her skill 1, if there is a total sum of 7 plus gaze or plus 1 contempt on the enemies, she will instead use her skill 3-2. And what it does is it'll prioritize gaze or contempt targets as sub-targets, with the skill having an attack weight of 3. She deals less damage to her sub-targets. However, if the attack is targeting just one person, they will take 200% damage. She has increased coin power for every 4 bleed and tremor on the main target with a max of 4. Deals extra damage for every bleed and tremor on the main target. Deals extra damage for every sum of gaze on the target. She will consume any gaze or contempt on all the targets that were hit. It deals a whole lot of extra damage, dealing an extra 235% damage the target has contempt. And also inflicts tremor count, bleed count, and also does the amplitude conversion into tremor hemorrhage, and also inflicts tremor burst as well. So, as previously stated, this identity has synergy with a different one. And what it does is, if Corp E.G.O Fell Bullet Yi-Song is on field, and if Ryōshū is able to use a base skill and has contempt of the gaze, he will use a unique skill called I Shall Fire anytime that will prioritize Ryōshū, and it will gain extra attack weight for every 3 torn that he has, with extra coin power and base power for poise and poise count on himself, gaining poise for every torn memory. And will essentially just do a really nice attack that could end up killing her. However, if she were to survive, a different target would take damage. So, essentially, it's a pretty nice attack, dealing extra damage on her, but it can kill her from what I understand. So it's recommended to be careful if you're going to have them both on. And then for her last skill, her defense skill, with it just being a normal basic defense skill, well, what it does is if she does not have contempt of the gaze, and there's a total of 7 plus sum of gaze on all enemies, or plus 1 of contempt on all enemies, she will gain contempt of the gaze once per turn. If she has contempt of the gaze, she gains the listed buffs on the thing, and also gains plus 10 to her final power. And also, if she gets hit while she's using it, the attacker will gain 1 bleed count. So this Ryōshū has 3 combat passives and 1 support passive. The combat passive, let me show everyone something very interesting, will be skipped, as we spoke about that a little bit before. So I'll start with the first one. The first one is Grasp, that forbids falling. What it does is when she gets staggered, she'll gain 4 protection, and then will gain contempt of the gaze next turn, once per encounter. When she dies, she will apply bind, bleed count, tremor, and tremor count against 3 enemies that has the most gaze or contempt in the descending order. And in focus encounter, it'd be the different parts. Her second combat passive, which is letters, hand, I let slip. And what it does is, when she hits an enemy, she'll inflict gaze. If she has gaze of contempt, she'll inflict more gaze. When she gets hit by an enemy, they will gain gaze. If she has contempt of the gaze, when hit by the attacker's final point, she will inflict 20% of that damage dealt as sloth damage back to the target. And then if she uses her base skills to consume gaze or contempt on an enemy, she will gain gaze of the contempt. So her support passive, It Flows and Cries, what it does is if the ally with the earliest deployment order hits an enemy, they will inflict 1 bleed. If the target already has bleed, they will inflict a bleed count. And then if this said ally were to take damage, they would inflict tremor against the attacker. And if the attacker already had tremor, they will also take tremor count as well. So from what I can tell, this ID fits well in a bleed team mainly, and possibly a little bit of a tremor team. But her main focus is inflicting the gaze and contempt to enemies while giving herself contempt of the gaze, essentially having everyone attack her while she's got the high protection, allowing her to take the blunt of the damage, while also making the enemies weaker while she's doing it. And then quite literally how to play her is you just use her skills to give enemies gaze and contempt, while also having her take the blunt of the damage, giving her contempt of the gaze and her high protection, while also building up the stacks needed to use cascading gaze of awe underneath contempt, which is her main heavy damage dealer. While she is pretty good in a lot of other fields, I'd say just have her as like a protector, while also being able to inflict tremor and bleed, but not having her like heavily focused on tremor. I just want to take a moment and thank you all for your supports and feedback on this far on this little mini series. This is something I've been wanting to do for a bit now, and I'm glad you guys are liking this. So I'm going to keep putting out more. And do check out the Discord server if you want to vote on who's going to be next on the list. Because once I have done one ID for every single character, I'm then going to start going down a list for each individual character. So yeah.